Question number 8, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Building and Housing. Is the construction sector report released today correct that labour productivity in the sector has increased only 1% since 2012? If so, will he back the industry's call for more government involvement in the building sector, including procuring houses at scale?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Statistics New Zealand figures on labour productivity in the construction sector actually show a 7.6% increase over the last 3 years. So no, I don't think the figures are correct. These same Stats New Zealand figures show an increase of 11.1% since we became the government, and actually also show a decline of 2.7% in productivity under the 9 years of the former government. The government has been involved in scale procurement on sites like Awatea, Wells Street, Colombo Street in Christchurch, Tamaki, Hobsonville, McLennan and Moya Road in Auckland. I'll be announcing further projects later this year, and where it makes sense for scale procurement, the government will pursue it.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Phil Twyford.
Sir, the Minister answered a number of questions, but not my one. And it was laid down, it was specifically about labour productivity since 2012. He answered 2 other periods, but not the period that I asked about.
I will hear from the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, in the start of my question, I very specifically addressed the Statistics New Zealand construction labour productivity figures that are on the public record and pointed out what they were for the last 3 years, 7.6%.
The difficulty is, in fact, it is a different period. The member specifically asked for figures from 2012. The Minister, in his answer, refers to the last 3 years, which I would take it to be from 2013. And certainly, I don't need much assistance, certainly then disputed the fact of the 1% by saying it was a factor 7.6% increase. I'm unable to read, to determine really whether the question's been answered correctly, because it may have been, although in the way it's answered it's not clear. The best way forward is we'll accept that that question has been addressed by the Minister, and I will allow the member now an additional supplementary question. Phil Twyford, supplementary question.
Supplementary. Isn't the obvious way to smooth out the boom and bust cycle that the construction sector report talks about through a government-backed building program like Kiwi Build, which over 10 years would deliver 100,000 affordable homes for first home buyers?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I just saw through the House a pig flying, because anybody who believes that Labor, with the minuscule amount of money that they have budgeted, can build 100,000 houses, also believes in the Tooth Fairy and Father Christmas.
That's right. Supplementary question, Stuart Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, have any difficulties arisen in the productivity gains in house prefabrication offshore, and if so, what steps are being taken to resolve these?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, yes, some companies have chosen to prefabricate homes offshore. The government, through my ministry, issued a determination that councils were correct in granting building consents for such homes. But I'm disappointed that the Auckland Council has challenged that decision in the court. That is a difficulty because actually the competition from prefabrication offshore actually is one of the answers to improving both the supply and the competitiveness in the building industry, and that is an issue that the government will be joining those court proceedings and vigorously defending the need for additional competition and productivity improvements.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Does he agree that the shortage of labour that is preventing the industry scaling up to meet demand in Auckland, driving up prices and causing the epidemic of shoddy building? Be careful, because you might be the Housing Minister next, Stephen.
Just stick to the question.
Does he agree?
Order. That is certainly what happens when we get interjections initiated by my right-hand side, to which the member then responds with some justification. If we could now have the supplementary question without any further assistance from the Honourable Stephen Joyce, I would be grateful. Phil Twyford, supplementary question.
Does he agree that the shortage of labour that is preventing the industry scaling up to meet demand in Auckland, driving up house prices and causing the epidemic of shoddy building, is largely a result of the boom and bust cycle because so many skilled tradespeople were lost to the industry at the time of the global financial crisis?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, it is correct that in 2007 and 8, the number of homes being constructed in New Zealand plummeted to the lowest levels in 40 years. It's also true that over the last 5 years, the number of homes being constructed in New Zealand has gone from 12,000 a year to over 29,000 a year, and it's a little bit inconsistent for the member in one breath to say that there are labour shortages and the next breath that there aren't any new houses being built. I would note that my colleague Stephen Joyce has substantially increased the investment in skills training so that we now have more apprenticeships in the construction industry than at any time in the last 25 years.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Given that his officials have advised him that the industry is still building 8,000 fewer homes than Auckland needs each year just to keep up with demand, isn't it clear that the government needs to be a more active player using procurement and boosting apprenticeships far beyond the current level to support a sustained expansion of the industry?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, in this term of Parliament, we're going to build the number of houses in Whangarei in Auckland. In the next term of Parliament, that is to occur again. We have got the strongest building boom with over $12 billion of residential investment. In Auckland, we've seen the number of houses constructed grow from 4,000 per year to over 9,800 a year. And I also note, for the members' information, in the last year, government agencies have completed over 1,000 houses, and that too is more than in 25 years.
Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Does he accept that in an undersupplied market, developers will always build high-end homes to maximise their profits? So surely the role of government is to build enough homes priced so that most people can afford them.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, the primary reason that the building industry, and in the last decade as well as this decade, has built mainly expensive homes in a market like Auckland is because the section price has become ridiculously high under planning policies. And the key changes, such as the RMA changes, the changes in the National Policy Statement, the changes in the unitary plan that the member opposite has opposed, are pivotal to getting reasonable land prices, and with that will go reasonable house prices. No members on this side of the House do not agree that the only way to have houses being built is to have them built by the government.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Will he listen to the construction industry when they say that after 8 years of little progress and little government support for productivity reforms, isn't it time for a government-backed building program that would smooth out the boom and bust cycle and allow the industry to sustain growth and lift productivity?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I have noted that member has promised that Labor would remove any of the boom-bust cycle. Well, he's got a greater chance than King Canute. The reality is that there always will be business cycles, and I don't know of any government in the world that has completely removed those. When the member says the government has made no progress, I simply point out the fact that there were 4,000 homes being built in Auckland per year, and there's now nearly 10,000 homes being built per year in Auckland.